All right, guys, a little technical difficulties a little earlier, but we're back on track. But anyway, we want to basically say thank you guys for tuning in to our health and wellness podcast. And last week we kicked it off talking about how that God wanted you to live a long and healthy life. As we always try to tell people, we want you to look good and feel good inside and out. We want to add years to your life and life to your years. This is our motto, has been for many, many years, because I believe that we were designed to live long and healthy lives. I always talk about how I believe that God designed us to live to the very day that we die. It wasn't intended for us to, die with sickness and disease and all these kinds of things. We were designed to live long and healthy lives and go up on the mountain when we're 120 years old and just go on, into the next life, so to speak. This is what we were designed for, but our world has kind of gotten all out of kilter. Since the beginning of the world, man has modernized, civilized. Our food supply is a whole lot different. And that's why we want to talk about health and nutrition. We're going to be talking about nutrition. We're going to be talking about the problems that have arisen, especially in the last 100 years or so, that have contributed to the sickness and disease of the world. We go through life, and one day we wake up and we might be sagging and dragging and not feeling good, feeling lethargic, feeling overweight, feeling fat, feeling stiff. Even people now, teenagers are dying of heart attacks and strokes. We have teenagers, young people having type 2 diabetes because we have an atrocious, sad American lifestyle. Sad American diet is killing people day after day after day. And we're going to tell you what has happened over the last 100+ years that has caused this pandemic of sickness and disease in our country. I was talking about, how that, at the turn of the 1900s, at the end of the 1870s, they invented all this new technology so that we can have refined and processed white flour, white sugar, white rice, homogenized foods and pasteurized foods that kill the enzymes and the liveliness of the food. And during that time, when we were turning into the 1900s, one in 33 people got heart disease. Now it's 1 in 2. You realize that 50% of the people that you look at, that you live with, go to church with, your family members, 50% are most likely to die of heart disease than any other disease. And the second is cancer. Now it was 1 in 3, and now it's 1 in 3, and with cancer. But now they're saying it's getting close to the same rate as heart disease. So it's very likely that someone's either going to die of heart disease or cancer in our country, or it's basically in the world now, because the world has adopted the sad American diet. And so it's kind of sad that we realize that at the turn of the century, with all of these new processings and manufacturing and the adding of chemicals, preservatives, stabilizers, and emulsifiers, and all these things to our food supply, sickness and disease began to rise, which could be the JAMA journals basically record, how that after the turn of the 1900s, tumors, polyps, colon disease, gallbladder removals, hiatal hernias, appendicitis, heart disease, all of these sicknesses and diseases began to rise and rise and rise and rise. And with the invention of all these things. And so now when we live, 80% of the people today are overweight or obese. And this leads to heart disease, cancer, and other types of sicknesses and diseases. So we have to really kind of sit back and realize, that the answer to these problems is not the high-tech medical community, because ever since they declared war on cancer with President Nixon in the 60s, cancer hasn't declined, it's inclined. It's still continuing to arise. It's gone from 1 in 3 to really almost 1 in 2. The statistics are staggering. After we declared war on cancer, because the only thing they have done with the Nixon era declaring war on cancer is that all they really know about cancer now is how to categorize the different types of cancers, but they really have no cures or anything like that. I was pastoring churches when I got interested in health and nutrition, and which is how I got into helping people with health and nutrition and connecting all the dots to help people to live longer and healthier. I was visiting the sick people. I was in the hospitals. I saw what radiation and chemotherapy did to people. And if you've gone through that and it was successful for you, I thank God for that, but statistically, most people who get through the first year cancer free, within 5 years, the cancer comes back and ends up taking them out, even though the medical community will say it had nothing to do with it, because if you go a year, they can call you completely cancer free, cured, no more cancer. But then if it shows up 2 years later, even though it could be related to the first one, they say it has no relationship when we know that it does. So it's just the world that we live in. During World War II, the processing, the canning started getting more and more popular with people. And the reason for that is because, they had to feed, thousands and thousands of troops overseas. And so canning was a way that you could get some food over there to have some nutritional value. It would keep people alive, so to speak, but it was when we were beginning to add all the preservatives, the chemicals, and everything to increase shelf life. And when you have products that can stay on the shelf 5, 10, 15, 20 years, it's not very stabilized foods. I have a Happy Meal that's over 20 years old, and maybe I'll show it to you next time, but it looks just like it did almost from the time that we bought the Happy Meal over 20 years ago, because it's not real food. It's preserved, chemicalized foods that have almost no nutritional value, and they don't spoil or rot. I always tell people, the rule of thumb is eat foods that will go bad by spoiling and rotting. Otherwise, it's embalmed with chemicals. We call them frankenfoods. And Dr. Joel Furman wrote a book about the frankenfoods. I would encourage you to get it, about how that fast food, chemicalized foods is killing us by the millions in our world today. So top killers of Americans, we've already discussed, is heart disease, cardiovascular disease, heart attack, stroke. Number 2, cancer. Number 3, pneumonia, influenza. And even during the so-called pandemic and COVID, it was still number 3 under heart disease and cancer. I wish everybody got as upset over heart disease and cancer as they did with COVID. We're not saying COVID was a good thing, but COVID, the good news with COVID, less than 1% of the people who got COVID died. That is not a pandemic. That was just a bad outbreak of the flu. That was terrible. We got it. We understand it. But less than 1% of the people died from it, which was a good thing. People that did was terrible. It was tragic. But I remember growing up when the swine flu was killing people, or whatever. Then the next cause is diabetes, and as we mentioned, we now have children being born with cancer and heart disease. We're seeing young children dropping dead with heart attacks and strokes for the first time in the history of the United States. This is a true statistic. My grandchildren will have a less life span than I do or my parents did, because life expansion is going down, not up. And then when you are living longer, you're not living with quality of life. You might get quantity, but being in a nursing home with needles stuck in you and with your diaper on, not able to talk because you had a bad stroke and all of that, that's not living. That is a very painful way to go out of this world. The next one is liver disease. Next one would be Alzheimer's. An interesting statistic is suicide, which is also related to chemicalized foods, depression, and other things. We'll get into that some. And then the 8th killer was accidents. And then number 9 was doctors, prescribed drugs, and accidental things that happen in hospitals. When I used to visit hospitals, they used to tell me, they said, you're more likely to pick up an infectious disease in the hospital than you will outside in the world. In fact, when you're in the intensive care unit, I had a nurse tell me one time when a good friend of mine was in there, I was in there, they said, we want to get him out of here as quick as possible because there's just, even though we sanitize and clean this room, most infections are picked up in the ICU and the hospital itself. So these are the things that have changed since the 1900s, 1870s, milling, processing, refining of our foods, and then they started chemicalizing it. So I call them the murder suspects. What is it that's killing us? Refined, preserved, processed, devitalized, overcooked, chemicalized, denatured food that's grown with insecticides, herbicides, chemical fertilizers, genetically altered seeds. When I was working at a children's home years ago, we used to grow silage corn. And I mean, I used to call it radioactive. The corn was orange and purple and fluorescent colors. I mean, it had everything in the seed that it needed. It had fertilizer, had insecticide, it had everything it needed so that when you planted it, you no longer, like when I was a little kid, when my dad grew corn, I had to have to go in and chop the weeds out of the corn. It was really hard work and sweat and work because they didn't have all this. They had a little bit of fertilizer, but it wasn't. Then there's insecticides, herbicides, chemical fertilizers. Livestock are fed hormones, steroids, antibiotics, which is why a lot of times antibiotics have been overprescribed, but it's also in the meat supply because they use them, and particularly in big commercial, they're loading them up with hormones and with antibiotics, and we eat those hormones and antibiotics, which is why some of the statistics have indicated one of the reasons why girls and boys are entering into puberty sooner is because of all these hormones added to the foods. And then you have artificial flavors, additives, stabilizers, enhancers. Things have been homogenized, sterilized, and chemicalized with colors, with flavor enhancers that are very addictive. In fact, the tobacco company, which was busted for adding all these extra chemicals to the cigarettes, basically are the same people that are making the foods now. All these colorful, wonderful foods in America, a lot of this stuff is outlawed in Europe and other countries. You can't buy aluminum pots and pans in Europe. You can't have certain foods. That's why when we went to Greece this past summer, the foods there are so much fresher, more healthy, more vital because they don't have all this junk in the food. And so we have to, nutritionally wise, we got to eliminate the junk food, the fast food, the greasy foods, the fried foods. These are things that we cannot continue to do if we want to live long and healthy. And the other thing is that these create the plastics that we're using. This is why there's so much estrogen in women's bodies and men's bodies. Over estrogen, we know creates cancer. It's not whole soy, it is refined soy, it is soybean oil. If you go buy salad dressings and look at a lot of condiments, one of the first ingredients is soybean oil. And it's omega-6 oil that's made mostly with genetically modified oils. And soy, fermented soy, whole food soy is anti-estrogenic. This has been proven clinically. So soy is not your enemy. It's refined soy that has been extracted, the omega-6 oils out of it, which create havoc in your body and can create estrogen, which sets the body up for cancer. It's just these simple things, folks, that we're teaching you. And I'm not going to be able to cover everything on this podcast tonight. We'll pick up next week because we want to be able to tell you the murder suspects, the things you shouldn't be eating, but the things that you should be eating in their natural state. What I call, one of the things, I guess it was 35 years ago when Jody and I started our health journey, I was sick and tired of being sick and tired. I used to get multiple colds every winter. I used to get the flu multiple times. I get tonsillitis every winter. I get bronchitis every winter. I would have hemorrhoids. I would get diarrhea and get all the viruses. I was 50 plus pounds overweight. Had low energy, and I was sick and tired of being sick and tired, and I was dealing with people that were sick and tired and in the hospitals and nursing homes and the shut-ins. And somebody came to us and said, "Well, you need to change your lifestyle. You need to change your diet." And we did something as simple as change our lifestyle and our diet, and we eliminated all of our problems within about 6 to 8 weeks. I went through that winter for the first time in my life since I was a young kid. I didn't have any spring allergies. I didn't have the fall allergies. I didn't get tonsillitis, bronchitis. Went through the whole winter, didn't have the first cold, didn't have the first flu, didn't have the first sinus flare up. My hemorrhoids went away. I lost weight. I stabilized, and I was in the best health that I've been in my life for many, many years. One of the things that we tell people, we're going to run through a list of things that we need to eliminate, and then next week we'll pick up and talk about the rest of it. I think we will be traveling to Dallas. So the week after, we will suspend the podcast just because we're going to be on a LifeWave meeting down in Dallas, Texas. And so we'll have to skip a few Thursdays, but we'll let you know that ahead of time. But I'm going to give you the rundown of some things that you need to eliminate from your diet, and then we'll talk about more positive things. But we got to talk about the negative things. One of the things that changed our life was, number one, eliminating refined white sugar. I love sugar. I used to drink Mountain Dews. I used to love Dr. Pepper. I used to love to eat cake and pie and ice cream, all those things. I eliminated white sugar, refined. I'm not talking about real sugar. A lot of people say sugar is your enemy. Yes, refined sugar is, but natural sugars found in whole foods are good for you. A banana is good for you if you eat it in its whole food form. Apples and raspberries and strawberries and oranges eaten whole with the fiber and everything in it does not, that kind of sugar will kill cancer, whereas refined sugar will feed cancer. Refined white salt, we've taken, again, the milling and the processing plants formed in the late 1800s began to refine everything, and they turned sugar and salt into a chemical rather than a food. And so dark Himalayan sea salt, Celtic sea salt, raw, that's organic and natural. These things are actually good for you. In fact, they say quit salt to lower your blood pressure. I agree, but you got to read the cans and the labels because there's so much salt in canned goods and preserved foods. You got to find the salt-free versions are at very best a low sodium, but the best way to buy your vegetables, number one, is fresh, and number two is frozen with nothing added to it. Those are the best way to eat your vegetables. So I don't want to discourage you too much, but you got to eliminate the salt. But a little pinch of gray Celtic sea salt, 2 or 3 pinches a day with a glass of water, has been proven to lower blood pressure, not raise it. White flour, that was one of the things that I ate a lot of white flour products. And I remember trying to transition from white breads and to whole wheat, breads and whole grains and things like that. Yes, it was a little challenging at first, but it's like anything. It's like smoking. When people start smoking, they don't enjoy it. It's an acquired habit. Drinking is the same way. A lot of times people just don't pick up a cigarette and go, "Ooh, boy, this is so wonderful." They just start doing it because it's a social thing. It's something to do. And then all of a sudden it becomes a habit and a vice. Because then the body becomes dependent upon it. Same thing happens when you're eating a lot of refined foods. Your body becomes addicted to it because there are drug-like effects upon the body. Refined oils, instead of you don't really need to use a lot of oils, for cooking. We tell people, organic, extra virgin, cold press, first press, olive oil, avocado oils, sparingly to cook with, so it doesn't stick in the pans. Those things are perfectly okay. But today, refined oils, processed oils, hydrogenated, partially hydrogenated oils, all those things create havoc. They're going to cause you to gain weight, get cholesterol. They're going to clog up your arteries and cause all kinds of different things. White rice. Good news about white rice, is that it's still whole, but because it's been refined, it creates a high glycemic index, which will shoot your blood sugar up, which will overwork your pancreas, which is why type 2 diabetes is basically a side effect of eating refined processed foods. White dairy, I remember Lionel Richie, who's a famous singer, used to play for the Commodores. When I was on the solo, he lost his voice, went from doctor to doctor to doctor, and he thought he was going to have to quit his singing career. Somebody told him to eliminate, basically white flour, white sugar, and dairy. I mean, within 6 weeks, he had his voice back. So very important, like soda pops. Soda pops are not good for you to drink. They're made with water that's probably comes from a municipal source, and then it's injected with a gas, and then it's added preservatives and colors, caramel, which is a carcinogen. And it's most of them are loaded with sugar. Then the diet ones use artificial sweeteners that are terrible for you, that have linked to dementia, Alzheimer's. In fact, aspartame will cause some people to gain weight, not everybody, but a lot of people will gain weight from it. Getting away from genetically engineered foods, like processed foods, and even, a lot of people say, well, I don't eat any of that stuff. I said, well, if you're eating commercial meat, you are, because the chickens and the cows, 80% of the soy, GMO soy, is eaten by commercial agriculture. Just that simple. So you're eating it and getting all the other things, as far as that goes. So, these things are contributing factors. You got to quit eating foods that are chemicalized and processed and overly processed and refined and can sit on the shelf for 10 or 15 years. If you're reading the label and all of it, you feel like you're speaking in a foreign language and it's mostly chemicals that you're reading, there's the clue. We want to eat things as close to the way that God and nature makes them. That's the key. And that's what we'll kind of pick up on next time, as far as that goes, because I got to get your mindset to understand that the foods that we're eating today are Franken foods. They're not real foods. And that is why we have so much sickness, disease, people that are overweight, people who are obese. And then these foods, because of the way that they are created, they're created to be addictive. And then the next thing you know, you're hooked on them. And then I hear people all the time, say today, oh, I don't like fruits and vegetables. I don't like to eat vegetables. I can't stand water. It's because your body is acidic. It's been reprogrammed with chemicalized foods, and it's creating havoc in your body, which is why we're starting to see children, as we mentioned earlier, dying of cancer, sicknesses, and diseases that used to people didn't get to their 50s, 60s, and 70s and beyond. Now those are getting into the lower populations because, the only thing they want to eat is processed macaroni and cheese, and basically pizzas, fast food, quick food, microwave food, sodas and drinks. It's just amazing. When I was working in my years ago, 30 plus years ago, I used to work in a college and do high school recruiting. And I was astounded how when I walked in one day, all the fast food places had McDonald's and all these people were there. They had soda machines. Kids were starting off the day drinking a Mountain Dew and a pack of Skittles. And then they wonder why they were hyperactive, and then they would crash and they would go to sleep. When you add all this stuff into our diets, this is what we have created in our society, a society that is sick and dying and on the increase of sickness and disease and not declining. There has been no cures for cancer. Nobody's telling you how to clean up your life, but I'm going to do that for you and help you, just like some mentors and people helped me 35 years ago when I was looking for answers. I'm giving you 35 plus years of research of people who have lived to be not just 50 years old, but I'm talking about my mentors lived up into their 90s and even on up into their hundreds. And we're going to share with you the centenarians and all the studies, the longevity studies, what you need to do to live a long and healthy life and stay active even in your 90s and 100 and beyond. Things that we can do with our lifestyle, also some technological things, supplementation things. We'll be sharing that with you also. So with that, we're going to wind up this podcast. Thank you for coming on. I hope this is a blessing to you. The next one, I'll try to be a little bit more positive and give you a few more food tips. But until then, guys, love you. God bless you. May you prosper. Be in good health, even as your soul prospers.